The grand mansion stood glowing under the golden evening lights. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Guests dressed in their finest clothes moved from one corner to another, holding plates of food and drinks, talking loudly as if every word needed to be heard. It was one of those gatherings where everyone tried to outshine everyone else. At the center of it all was the host, a wealthy man known for his arrogance as much as his money. He loved attention, and nights like this were his stage. He laughed loudly, greeted every guest with a glass of wine, and boasted about his achievements at every chance he got. Everything about him screamed power and pride. Among the servants moving around the room was a young waitress. She carried a silver tray carefully, making sure not to spill even a drop of wine. Her uniform was neat, her steps quiet, and her eyes stayed down. She didn't speak much, only nodded politely when spoken to. While most of the guests didn't even notice her, one or two whispered about how calm and graceful she looked. But she was invisible to most of them, just another face in the background. The mansion's grand hall was beautifully decorated. A tall chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting soft light on the polished marble floor. The tables were filled with dishes that looked more like art than food. But what caught the young waitress's attention every time she passed by was the grand piano near the corner of the hall. It stood gleaming under the lights, untouched, silent, almost waiting for someone to bring it to life. Each time she walked past it, her eyes lingered for a second. She didn't mean to stare, but something about it pulled her. The way the light reflected off its smooth black surface reminded her of a different time, a time she had tried to forget. She used to play once long ago before life forced her to put that part of herself away. She quickly turned her eyes back to her work, afraid someone might notice. But she didn't realize that someone already had. The host, standing nearby, saw her glance at the piano more than once. He was already in a playful mood, the kind that made him enjoy other people's discomfort. A smirk crossed his face as he sipped his drink. He turned to his friends and whispered something that made them laugh. Then he looked back at the waitress, curious. As the night went on, the laughter grew louder. The guests were now comfortable enough to joke, gossip, and show off their wealth. Some of them danced, some told exaggerated stories, and some competed over who had spent more money on their last vacation. The host enjoyed every bit of it. He thrived on being admired, but soon the mood began to shift. The usual talk and laughter started to feel repetitive. People wanted something different, a bit of entertainment. That was when the host remembered the quiet waitress who kept glancing at the piano. He clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. The music stopped and all eyes turned toward him. He raised his glass high and said loudly, "My friends, we've eaten, we've talked, we've laughed, but something is missing tonight. Don't you think we need a bit of music?" The guests cheered. Some called for the pianist, but there wasn't one. The host grinned. But wait," he said, pretending to think. "I believe we have someone right here who might give us a performance." Everyone looked around, confused. Then he pointed toward the waitress. She froze where she stood. For a second she thought he was joking, but his eyes told her he wasn't. "Come on," he said, his tone half mocking, half commanding. "You've been eyeing that piano all night. Let's see what you can do. Play us something." A few guests laughed softly. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. The waitress's heart began to pound. Her hand, still holding the tray, felt heavy. She didn't know what to say. I can't, sir," she murmured. "I'm just here to serve." The host's grin widened. "Oh, come now. Don't be shy. It's just for fun. Surely you know at least a little tune." The guest turned toward her, waiting. The laughter began again, not cruel yet, but expectant. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't that she didn't know how to play. She did, better than anyone in that room might guess. But being forced, being mocked, being made a spectacle, that was something she had never imagined. Her eyes went to the piano once more. For a moment, everything around her blurred. She remembered the small music room from years ago, the smell of old wood, the sound of her teacher's voice, the way her fingers had once moved freely across the keys. That life had ended the day her family lost everything. She placed the tray on a nearby table and took a slow breath. Maybe refusing would make things worse. The host clearly wouldn't let it go, and she didn't want to cause trouble. The guests were waiting, and the air in the room had grown thick with tension. "All right," she said softly, almost to herself. A few people clapped as she walked slowly toward the piano. The sound of her shoes on the marble floor echoed faintly. She could feel dozens of eyes following her every step. The host leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smug smile still on his face. When she reached the piano, she ran her fingers lightly over the keys. They were cold, smooth, and strangely familiar. She sat down on the bench and stared at them for a long second. It had been years since she had played for anyone, or even touched a piano. But the memory of music was still somewhere inside her. The room fell silent. The laughter was gone now, replaced by quiet curiosity. Someone whispered, "Do you think she can actually play?" Another said, "Probably not." The host chuckled. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the piano's surface. Tired eyes, a plain uniform, and a face that hid too many unspoken stories. In that silence, she remembered the words her mother used to say, "When you play, let your heart speak for you." Her fingers rested on the keys. She didn't know what she was going to play. She only knew she had to. Maybe not for them. Maybe for herself. She pressed the first key gently, and a soft note filled the air. It sounded hesitant, like a whisper. Then she played another and another, slowly stringing them together into a melody she once knew by heart. The chatter stopped completely. People leaned in, surprised. The sound that came from the piano was delicate but full of feeling, not the unsure playing they expected. Her fingers began to move with more confidence, finding their rhythm again. Each note seemed to carry a memory, joy, pain, hope, all mixed together. The song wasn't loud, but it filled the room in a way no music system could. The host's smile faded slightly. He hadn't expected this. The guests exchanged glances, some even lowering their glasses mid-sip. The waitress kept playing, lost in the music now. For those few minutes, she forgot she was being watched. She wasn't a servant anymore. She was the girl she used to be, the one who loved music, who dreamed big before life became too hard. When the final note faded into silence, no one moved. It felt as if time itself had paused. Then slowly, a few people started clapping. The sound grew louder until the entire room was filled with applause. The waitress stood up quietly, unsure how to react. Her eyes were slightly wet, but she blinked quickly to hide it. She gave a small nod and stepped back from the piano. The host forced a laugh, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I didn't know we had such talent among the staff." But his tone had lost its arrogance. The guests didn't laugh this time. They just looked at the young woman, the quiet waitress who had just turned a moment of mockery into something unforgettable. She picked up her tray again and went back to her duties, but nothing felt the same anymore. People whispered softly as she passed, not with ridicule this time, but with admiration. The grand piano, once silent and ignored, now seemed alive. And though no one could fully explain what had just happened, everyone in that room felt something shift, something they would remember long after the party ended. After the applause faded and the guests slowly returned to their conversations, the young waitress tried to slip back into the rhythm of her work. Her hands still trembled slightly as she carried the tray again, but it wasn't from fear this time, and it was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long while. For the first time in years, she had touched a piano and played from her heart. The sound of those notes still echoed softly inside her mind. Every time she blinked, she could see the faces of the guests, the surprise, the quiet admiration, the disbelief. And though no one said anything directly to her, she could sense the change in the air. When she passed the host's table, he looked at her briefly. There was no trace of the mocking grin he had worn earlier. Instead, his face looked uncertain, almost awkward. He didn't say a word, and she didn't expect him to. She only gave a polite nod and walked away, holding her tray close to her chest. The night carried on, but something had shifted. The loud laughter seemed softer now. The music from the speakers felt less real compared to the melody that had filled the room moments before. A few guests approached her quietly to whisper words of praise. "You play beautifully," one woman said with a kind smile. "You must have learned somewhere." The waitress only nodded. "A long time ago," she replied softly before moving away. She didn't want to talk about it. Talking would open doors she had closed long ago. In the corner of the hall, the host's close friends gathered around him. They teased him gently, saying, "Looks like your joke turned into the highlight of the night." Another added, "You didn't tell us your staff had talent like that." The host forced a laugh. I didn't know myself, he said, trying to sound casual. But inside he felt a strange discomfort. He had only wanted to entertain his guests to make them laugh. But now, instead of remembering his jokes or his fine wine, they would remember the waitress and the girl he had tried to embarrass. The rest of the evening passed quietly. The grand hall began to empty as the night grew late. The guests said their goodbyes, some still talking about the unexpected performance. The waitress helped clean the tables, collected empty glasses, and folded the napkins. Her shift was nearly over. When she went to the back area of the mansion to put away the trays, another worker smiled at her and whispered, "You were amazing. Everyone's talking about you." She smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," she said. "You didn't," the other replied. "You reminded people that real beauty doesn't always wear diamonds." The words made her pause for a moment. No one had said something like that to her in years. She only nodded and went back to work. A little while later, when most of the guests had gone, the host called for her. She hesitated, unsure of what he might say, but she went anyway. He stood near the grand piano, holding a half-empty glass of wine, his expression unreadable. "You surprised me," he said finally. "You really can play." She stayed quiet, unsure how to respond. He gave a small chuckle. "I'll admit I thought it would be a bit of fun, but, well, you made me look foolish in front of everyone." "I didn't mean to," she said softly. "I know," he replied quickly. "It's just unexpected. I didn't think someone like you could—" He stopped himself before finishing that sentence. She knew what he meant, though. "Someone like you." She simply said, "Music doesn't care who you are, sir." He stared at her for a second, then looked away. "Fair enough," he muttered. "You can go now." She nodded and turned to leave, but before walking away, she glanced at the piano one last time. It seemed different now, not just an instrument, but a reminder of something she had lost and maybe could still find again. That night, when she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window for a long time. The city outside was quiet, only a few cars passing by. She took off her shoes, rubbed her tired feet, and thought about the evening. Her mind went back to her childhood home, the tiny house filled with warmth, the sound of her mother humming while she practiced on an old second-hand piano. She remembered the competitions she used to join, the way her teacher used to say she had something rare, the kind of talent that couldn't be taught. Then came the hard years. Her father fell ill, the bills piled up, and the piano lessons stopped. She took part-time jobs, then full-time ones. The piano had to be sold. It felt like losing a piece of her soul, but she never said that out loud. Now, years later, she had played again, not for fame or applause, but because she had no choice. Yet somehow it awakened something deep inside her. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly. "Maybe it's not too late," she whispered to herself. The next few days at work were different. People treated her with a new kind of respect. The mansion staff, who used to overlook her, now greeted her warmly. Even some of the guests who returned for business meetings asked about her. One evening, as she was setting up for another event, a woman from that party came to see the host. When she noticed the waitress again, she walked over. "I've been thinking about your performance," the woman said. "I work with a local arts foundation. We host community recitals. If you ever want to play again, I could help arrange it." The waitress was taken aback. "Oh, I don't know," she said softly. "It's been a long time. I don't even have a piano anymore." The woman smiled kindly. "Think about it. Some doors only open once. Don't be afraid to step through." She handed her a small card and left. That night, the waitress held the card tightly in her hand. The thought of performing again scared her, but also filled her with a quiet excitement she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, the host couldn't shake the image of her playing. Every time he passed the piano, he remembered the sound, how it had silenced the room. He didn't like feeling guilty, but something inside him knew he had been wrong. He had treated her like entertainment, when in truth she had shown more grace and dignity than anyone else that night. He asked one of his assistants to find out more about her. When he learned about her background, her musical training, her family struggles, he felt a sting of shame. The next evening, when she arrived at work, he called her into his study again. She entered cautiously, unsure what to expect. He didn't waste time. "I owe you an apology," he said, his tone serious. I shouldn't have embarrassed you in front of everyone. What I did was disrespectful. She looked surprised but said nothing. I also heard that you studied music once, he continued. If you'd like to start again, I can help. I know people who could arrange lessons or maybe a place for you to practice. Her eyes widened. You don't have to do that, she said quickly. I want to, he replied. Consider it my way of making up for that night. She hesitated. It was hard to trust such an offer, but something in his tone sounded genuine this time. Not arrogant, not playful. Just honest, thank you, she said finally. I'll think about it. He nodded and smiled slightly. Good, you should. Talent like that shouldn't be hidden behind a tray of glasses. When she left his study, she felt a strange lightness in her chest. She didn't know if she would take his offer, but it felt good to be seen. Not as a servant, but as a person. Days turned into weeks. She began spending her breaks near the piano again. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would sit and play quietly, letting her fingers wander across the keys. Each note made her feel alive again. Other workers would stop to listen, smiling softly before going back to their tasks. The mansion, which once felt cold and distant, now seemed a little warmer. And though she didn't know it yet, those quiet moments would soon change everything. Because among the people who heard her play during those late evenings was a man who could make her dream come true again. Someone who would give her a chance to step back onto the stage she was meant for. For now, she just played made for herself, for her past, and for the small spark of hope that had begun to grow inside her once more. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet waitress continued her routine at the mansion. The events never stopped. Business dinners, charity nights, and parties filled with polished laughter and shallow compliments. Yet something inside her had changed. She no longer walked with her head down. There was a new calmness in her movements, a soft confidence that others began to notice. The guests who remembered her from that night often gave her warm smiles. Some asked her to play again, but she always refused politely. She wasn't ready. The memory of that evening still lived inside her like a fragile flame, something she wanted to protect until the right moment came. Late at night, when the mansion was nearly empty, she would sit by the piano again. She would close her eyes and play softly just for herself. The music floated through the quiet halls, gentle as a whisper. Those few minutes became her secret escape, a place where she could breathe freely, away from her struggles and the noise of the world. One evening, while she was playing alone, she didn't realize someone was listening. Near the doorway stood a man, an older guest who had returned to speak with the host about a charity event. He stopped when he heard the melody drifting from the grand hall. The notes were pure and heartfelt, not polished like those of a professional performer, but alive, carrying emotions that words could never express. When the song ended, she looked up and saw him standing there. Embarrassed, she quickly stood. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. He raised a hand gently. "Don't apologize," he said with a kind smile. "That was beautiful. You play like someone who has lived through a lot." She looked down, unsure how to respond. "It's just something I used to love," she said softly. "Used to?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Life got in the way." The man nodded slowly. "It does that to all of us," he said. "But sometimes life gives us a second chance too." He handed her a small card. "Come see me if you ever want to play again. I run a small local music program. We help people share their talent even if they don't have much. We could use someone like you." Before she could say anything, he smiled once more and walked away. She stood there, holding the card, staring at the name printed on it. For the rest of the night, her thoughts wouldn't settle. That offer stirred something inside her, hope but also fear. She had left that world behind long ago. To return meant opening old wounds. That night, when she got home, she sat at her small kitchen table and stared at the card under the yellow light. Her hands traced the edges slowly. She whispered to herself, "A second chance?" The thought scared her, yet deep down she wanted it more than anything. The next morning, she decided to visit the music center mentioned on the card. It was a small building tucked between old shops with faded letters on the signboard. When she walked inside, the sound of piano scales filled the room. Children practicing, laughter echoing from one of the classrooms. The same man she had met at the mansion was there, talking to a group of volunteers. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "You came," he said. "I was hoping you would," she smiled nervously. I just wanted to see the place, she said. He nodded. Come, I'll show you around. As they walked through the small rooms, she saw people of all ages learning, a little boy tapping drums, a teenage girl strumming a guitar, a woman singing softly while someone played beside her. There was warmth in the air, no judgment, no pride, just the simple joy of music. Everyone here has a story, the man said. Some lost everything, some never had a chance to start. But when they play, none of that matters. She listened quietly. Every word made her heart beat a little faster. Finally, he stopped near an old upright piano. This one's free, he said. If you ever want to practice, it's yours. She stared at the keys, her fingers twitching slightly. It's been years, she whispered. He smiled. Then it's time to begin again. For days, she couldn't stop thinking about that piano. Every evening after work, she found herself drawn back to the center. She started small, just simple scales, quiet pieces she remembered from childhood. Her fingers were stiff at first, but slowly the music began to return. The volunteers noticed her dedication. Some stayed after hours to listen. They told her she played with feeling, as if every note carried a secret. She only smiled shyly and kept playing. One evening, as she finished a song, the same man said, "You should perform at our community concert next month." She shook her head instantly. "No, I can't. I'm not ready." He looked at her kindly. "You said that about playing again, too. Look where you are now." She wanted to say no again, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he believed in her, or maybe it was the small part of her heart that missed being heard. "Think about it," he said. "Sometimes sharing your gift helps others more than you realize." For the next few weeks, she practiced whenever she could. Her days were long. Work at the mansion during the day, music in the evenings. But for the first time, she didn't feel tired. She felt alive. The staff at the mansion noticed her new energy. She smiled more, hummed softly while setting tables, and even the host saw the change. One day he asked, "You seem different lately. What's going on?" She hesitated, then said, "I've been playing again." He nodded thoughtfully. "Good, you should." His voice held no sarcasm this time. It was genuine. Perhaps he saw something in her that reminded him of what he had lost. A sense of passion, purpose, maybe even humility. As the day of the concert drew closer, her nerves grew stronger. She hadn't performed in years. What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed? The night before the event, she stayed late at the center practicing the same piece over and over until her fingers ached. When she finally stopped, she sat quietly, staring at the keys. She remembered her mother's words again. "When you play, let your heart speak for you." The next evening, the small concert hall was filled with families, friends, and neighbors. It wasn't a grand stage, but to her it felt just as big. Her hands shook as she waited for her turn. When her name was called, she walked slowly toward the piano. The lights were warm, the room quiet. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began. The first notes were soft, almost trembling. But as she continued, the fear melted away. The melody grew stronger, deeper, filled with the story of her life, her struggles, her loss, her rediscovery. The audience sat still, listening closely. Some even closed their eyes. When the final note faded, the silence was thick, then suddenly broke into applause. Loud, heartfelt, real. She stood up slowly, tears shining in her eyes. In the back of the room, she saw the man who had given her the card, smiling proudly. And just behind him, to her surprise, stood the host from the mansion. He had come quietly, unnoticed, and now he was clapping along with everyone else. After the show, he approached her. "You were incredible," he said. "I didn't know music could move people like that." She smiled softly. "Music always could," she replied. "We just forget to listen sometimes." He nodded, humbled. "I'm glad I listened this time." That night, as she walked home, the air felt lighter. The stars above looked brighter than usual. She realized she wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was herself again. The piano had given her back what life had taken away. Not fame, not money, but something much more important. Her voice. And though she didn't know what would come next, one thing was clear. She was no longer afraid of the music inside her. It was finally free. After the concert, life began to change in quiet, unexpected ways. The young woman who once hid behind her tray of glasses now carried herself with quiet pride. The music she had shared that night still echoed in her mind, but even more powerful was what it had done to her heart. For years, she had believed her dream was over. But standing on that small stage, hearing the crowd's applause, she realized that sometimes dreams don't die. They just wait for the right moment to wake up again. The morning after the concert, she returned to work at the mansion. Everything looked the same. The polished floors, the sparkling lights, the smell of fresh flowers. But to her, it felt different. She wasn't the same person anymore. When she arrived, the host was already there, talking to a few business guests in the main hall. As soon as he saw her, he waved her over. She hesitated, not sure what he wanted, but walked toward him politely. "You were amazing last night," he said, his tone warm and genuine. "I didn't expect to see something like that." "You moved the entire room," she smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. It meant a lot to play again." He nodded. "You know, after that first night when I made you play, I felt terrible. Watching you perform again, it reminded me how wrong I was. I'm sorry for the way I treated you." The apology surprised her. She had already forgiven him in her heart, but hearing the words still made her throat tighten. "It's all right," she said softly. "That night helped me more than you know. If it hadn't happened, I might never have played again." He looked at her with quiet amazement. "Funny how life works," he said. "Sometimes something that starts badly turns into something beautiful." He paused for a moment, then continued, "Listen, I've been thinking. I have connections in the city, people who manage events and music programs. If you're willing, I'd like to help you. You have real talent, and I think others should hear it." She froze. "You do that?" "I insist," he said simply. "Let me make it right." At first, she didn't know how to respond. The thought of performing again, not in a small hall, but in front of a larger audience, both thrilled and frightened her. She had always been afraid of being seen, but now the chance felt like something she couldn't ignore. That evening, she sat by her small window, thinking about everything that had happened. The sound of cars outside blended softly with the wind. She remembered the music center, the old piano, the smiling faces of those who had believed in her. And she realized something. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been overlooked, every dream that had been buried under struggle and doubt. The next morning, she told the host she would accept his help. He smiled proudly and said, "Good, you won't regret it." Within a week, he arranged a meeting with a local music director. The director had heard about her performance at the community concert and was already curious. When she played for him, he listened with closed eyes, letting each note wash over him. When she finished, he simply said, "You play with heart. That's what people want to feel. You have something real." He offered her a spot in an upcoming charity gala, a small performance, but one that would include an audience of musicians, sponsors, and journalists. It could open doors for her. When she heard the news, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, she felt her life moving towards something she had once only dreamed of. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. After her shifts at the mansion, she practiced late into the night at the music center. The same man who had given her the card, the one who believed in her first, often stayed behind to listen. He guided her gently, never pressuring her, only reminding her to play from the heart. "Don't think about impressing anyone," he said one evening. "Just tell your story through the keys. That's what they'll remember." As the day of the gala approached, her nerves grew stronger. The thought of performing in front of wealthy guests again reminded her too much of that first humiliating night. What if they laughed again? What if she failed this time? But then she remembered something important. She had already faced that fear once. She had already played in front of people who doubted her, and she had turned their silence into applause. This time, she wouldn't be the scared waitress at the corner of a grand party. She would be the woman who had fought her way back to her dream. When the night of the gala finally arrived, the mansion lights shone even brighter than before. The hall was filled with people dressed in expensive clothes, their conversations blending into a soft hum. The host was there too, looking proud and confident, though his pride this time came not from wealth, but from helping someone else shine. When she arrived, dressed simply but beautifully, the crowd turned to look. Some recognized her as the waitress from the host's earlier event, and whispers began to spread. "Is that her? The girl who played that night?" She took her place at the piano. The lights dimmed slightly and a hush fell over the room. Her hands rested on the keys. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Then softly the first notes began to play. The melody was gentle at first, like the sound of rain on a quiet evening. But as the song grew, it carried the weight of her entire journey, her pain, her hope, her rediscovered courage. The guests listened in stillness. Some wiped their eyes without even realizing it. Each note told a story, of lost dreams, of late nights filled with doubt, of small acts of kindness that brought her back to life. The music built like a wave, filling every corner of the room until finally, it reached its peak now as a powerful, emotional release that left everyone breathless. When the last note faded, silence filled the room again. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, rising into cheers. She stood up, her hands shaking slightly. The lights reflected tears in her eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance she had been given, for the people who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. As she stepped away from the piano, the host approached her with a proud smile. "You've done it," he said. "You've truly done it," she smiled back. "No," she said softly. "We did it." That night, she was no longer the waitress who had been forced to play. She was the musician who had reclaimed her voice. After the performance, people came up to her asking questions, praising her, offering contacts and opportunities. But what mattered most to her wasn't fame or success. It was that she had proven something to herself. Later, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, she sat by the piano one more time, touching the keys gently. The host came up behind her and said, "You changed the way people see things tonight, including me." She looked up at him, smiling. "Sometimes music teaches us what words can't," she said. He nodded. "You've taught me that." Outside, the night air was cool. As she stepped out of the mansion, she looked up at the stars and took a deep breath. The city lights shimmered, but for the first time she didn't feel small under them. She felt free. In her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be hard. There would be struggles, doubts, and moments of fear, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Because now she understood something simple and powerful. True strength doesn't come from how loud you are, but from how deeply you feel. And as she walked home under the quiet sky, the echo of her music followed her, soft, warm, and full of promise for what was yet to come. The weeks after the gala felt like a dream. The young woman's life, once quiet and unseen, began to change in ways she could never have imagined. Invitations started to arrive. Small performances, charity events, even interviews. People who had once walked past her without a glance now stopped to talk, to ask about her music, to tell her how her story had touched their hearts. But even with all the new attention, she stayed the same humble person she had always been. She still helped at the mansion when needed, still greeted everyone with kindness, still practiced at the small music center that had first opened its doors to her. Every morning, she woke early, walked through the city streets, and carried her worn music notebook everywhere she went. Inside it were handwritten pieces she had been working on since before anyone knew her name. Melodies inspired by moments of sadness, hope, and gratitude. She often said to herself, "The music belongs to life, not fame." That belief kept her grounded. Even as her world began to shift one morning, she received a message from the same music director who had given her the opportunity at the gala. He told her that a well-known orchestra was hosting an open audition for solo performers. It was an opportunity that could lead to national recognition, something she never dared to dream about before. For a long moment, she simply stared at the message. It felt unreal. Part of her wanted to ignore it, afraid that she wasn't ready. But another part, the stronger part, whispered that she couldn't run from her own gift anymore. So she accepted. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. She practiced until her fingers ached, playing the same piece over and over again. Sometimes she doubted herself, wondering if she was reaching too high. But then she would close her eyes and remember that night at the mansion. The moment when the music had silenced every doubt in the room. Each day brought its own lesson. The man from the music center continued to guide her, always reminding her that music was never about perfection but connection. "People don't remember every note," he said once. "They remember how you made them feel." The night before the audition, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her small window looking out at the glowing city. The wind carried faint sounds, laughter, traffic, someone playing a tune on a distant guitar. It reminded her how beautiful life could be when one truly listened. In that quiet moment, she whispered to herself, "No matter what happens tomorrow, I've already won." Because I found my voice again. The next morning came quickly. The music hall was large and bright, filled with people far more experienced than her. Some had studied music since childhood, trained in expensive schools. She was just a girl who had once served drinks at a party and played an old piano in a dusty community center. But she didn't let that thought stop her. When her name was called, she walked to the stage, feeling her heartbeat echo through her body. The room fell silent. She sat at the piano and placed her hands gently on the keys. For a few seconds, she didn't move, she just breathed. Then she began to play. The music started softly, like a whisper. It carried traces of her journey, the sorrow of her early struggles, the courage that had carried her through humiliation, the gratitude that had grown in her heart. Every note was alive, filled with meaning. As she played, her nerves disappeared. She wasn't thinking about the judges, the audience, or what they might say. She was telling her story one note at a time. The sound filled the hall, rising and falling like waves until the very last note faded into silence. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Then the judges began to clap. It wasn't polite applause, and it was real, heartfelt appreciation. One of them stood up, followed by another, and soon the entire room was on its feet. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. It wasn't pride that filled her heart. It was peace. She had done what she came to do. After the audition, she walked outside into the cool afternoon air. She didn't check her phone for results, didn't rush to find out what people thought. She just stood there for a while, feeling the sunlight on her face, grateful that she had made it this far. Later that evening, she received a call. The music director's voice sounded excited. "You did it," he said. "They chose you. You're going to perform with the orchestra." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. All the late nights, all the quiet doubts, all the small beginning, they had led her here. When she told the host, the same man who had once embarrassed her, he looked at her with genuine happiness. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've shown me that everyone deserves a chance to be seen for who they really are." She smiled warmly. "You helped me find that chance," she replied. Months passed, and her first performance with the orchestra drew near. It was to be held in one of the city's grand theaters, a place she had only ever seen in pictures. The night of the event, she stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly. As she looked out from behind the curtain, she saw the audience gathering, faces she didn't know. Yet somehow they all felt connected to her through the journey that had brought her here. When the conductor gave her a small nod, she stepped forward. The lights softened and the crowd grew silent. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and began. The piece she played was her own composition, something she had written in the quiet of her small room, inspired by every moment that had shaped her. It started with gentle notes, almost fragile, then grew into a rich, emotional wave that filled the theater. As she played, she felt something greater than herself moving through the music. The memories of her struggles, the kindness of those who helped her, the apology that healed an old wound, the rediscovery of hope. It was all there, alive in the sound. By the time she finished, the audience was in tears. The applause came like thunder, not just for her talent, but for her courage, her sincerity, her heart. After the show, she walked out into the cool night air again, just as she had after her first performance. The city lights seemed softer now, almost welcoming. She smiled, realizing that everything, every hardship, every humiliation, every lonely night, had led her to this moment of peace. The host and the man from the music center both found her outside. They didn't say much, and they didn't need to. The look in their eyes said everything. The host finally spoke. "You've reminded me that kindness matters more than power. You've changed the way I see people." She smiled gently. "Music changes hearts," she said. "Sometimes even our own." That night, when she returned home, she placed her old music notebook on her table. It was worn, its edges bent, but it had carried her through every step of her journey. She opened it and began to write a new piece, and one filled with calm and gratitude.